How do you balance off the responsibility of making sure that the homework gets done, but also do we practice our Spanish? How do I hear about your day? But do we practice our Spanish? When do we practice our Spanish? You're getting frustrated with me. Is it a personality thing? Is it a language thing? I'm worried about you. There's so much that goes into all of the considerations that any family that is a monolingual family would have. Then you add on to that a bilingual family, and the fact that all of these emotions come up because of everything that we mentioned before. Saludos. Today we are going to be talking about the challenges of passing down a heritage language, especially for Latinos and especially for Boricuas in la Diaspora. I am Dr. Xiomara Rivera Pagán, and I am the founder of LUPA Talks, and these weekly sessions are dedicated to talking about how language is used, how language is learned, and how we can reclaim our language so that we can connect with our family, our community, and our culture. If you hear things that you like today, then please like, subscribe, share with other people so that we can continue to build this community and build our confidence together. And be sure to stay till the end, because not only do I talk about the challenges, but I think there's one that I'm going to mention that we do not talk not nearly enough, number one. And number two, beyond the challenges, I actually give some recommendations on what we can do to grow and to move past all of these challenges. So I know it would be much easier if you already knew the language. It would be much easier if your parents or your family taught you the language when you were younger, or if you actually grew up in the culture. If you already knew the language, you would not be worried about actually coming back to the language and all the insecurities that come up for a lot of us when we are thinking about practicing our home language. And there are many reasons why our families might choose to intentionally not teach us our home language, or they might not be able to for many reasons. Language is a challenge to pass down, especially if you are in a dominant English space. So if you are in a space where you're hearing English all of the time, you're surrounded by English, and then your family is trying to practice a language that is not that, for example, Spanish, for example, Puerto Rican Spanish, it can be especially challenging, frustrating, difficult to maintain that home language with everything that's going on. Forget about the fact that you are a bilingual or multilingual household. So number one is language trauma. Language trauma as a result of discrimination, language trauma as a result of prejudice, language trauma comes for many, many reasons. And that discrimination and that prejudice where people judge you because of either the language that you're speaking or the accented way that you might be speaking English is nothing new. For generations, for centuries, language has been imposed on one nation or another. If you want to show what you value in terms of language and in terms of ideals, look to your schools and you'll see that the language policies often implement the language that is either trying to be placed into power or the language that is currently in power. And so English was imposed in Puerto Rico, English is imposed throughout the United States, and as people would come to the United States from other countries, there was this assumption that language did not exist if it wasn't in English. And so if students were not speaking in English, they were deemed as languageless, which just means that they were not valuing the language that they did have, because it's not that these students did not have language, it's that these students were not being valued for the language that they have, whether it be Spanish or other languages. And so for many years, students were expected to sink or swim. Either learn the language or you aren't intelligent enough, which is not the case. And research has shown quite the opposite, that there is an abundance of academic and intellectual ability that somebody has. And what schools are challenged with doing beyond language, but with any skill set, is bridging what you know to what you need to know. The same thing happens with language, bridging the language that you do have to the language that you are trying to acquire. It's not like students who even know social English go in there knowing all of the academic language. And so why would heritage speakers be expected to know all of the language that is being presented in those school systems? It is this language as a problem ideology, that your language is a problem because you are not speaking in the way that I either expect you to or I want you to. And so for many decades, language was just not dealt with at all, and these students were on their own up until the 70s with Lau versus Nicholas, where the Supreme Court deemed that finally it is not equitable to give these students education that is only in English without any strategies to actually access their home language and bridge it to additional languages. Now, as somebody who studies educational language policy, I can tell you that we still have a lot of work to do, but there has been advancements thanks to academics and educators and educational leaders to actually create more space for those learners who are coming in with languages other than English to value their language. We start to make certain civil rights advancements, and what happens? There's a pushback in the 80s of an English-only movement. And that's happening throughout the United States in different states where states are deeming English only as their dominant language and the language policy that they're putting into place. But this is also happening throughout school systems where they are either explicitly putting in English only and prioritizing English, or they're implicitly doing it. They're not writing it down, but they're still only giving access in English or prioritizing English or ignoring other languages. So in the 80s, you have this pushback within the school system, and we continue to kind of go back and forth, creating space and restricting space within the school systems. And you can see that our elders are growing up in that particular society, right? They're learning in school systems that are either saying you are not enough for the Spanish that you're speaking, or the English that you're not speaking, or the English that you're not speaking well enough. And so that sort of ideology is playing in their brains, as well as the fact that they are in work environments that are not valuing them. So the work environments are restrictive in terms of what languages you can and when you can use certain languages, when you can't use certain languages. And just to contextualize how long we've been dealing with this struggle of creating space for language and language rights, it wasn't until 2000 that finally the Supreme Court ruled that we needed an actual policy to address the fact that you cannot discriminate against someone for their language ability, especially if it does not interfere with their work, their job description. And the only way that we were able to achieve that is because individuals who were hired for their Spanish speaking ability were then fired for their Spanish speaking ability. They were hired to do a job that was in Spanish, and then they were fired because that job during lunch hours or during other hours they would speak Spanish, and then there was a clear prejudice against them speaking Spanish. So that was as recently as 2000, and as recently as 2025 we have the Supreme Court ruling that ICE can detain folks because of either speaking Spanish or an accented English. And so if we are dealing with these prejudices and these language rights challenges now, and we've seen it throughout our existence, then it makes sense that of course it was more challenging, more explicitly restrictive in terms of our use of languages other than English, for example, Spanish. And so it makes a lot of sense that they would want to protect us from the use of that language that has restricted them to a certain extent throughout their lives in schools and in working environments. Well, then of course they would want to save us from that sort of pain, that sort of prejudice, that sort of shame. Unfortunately, in that cycle of not teaching us and trying to save us from that judgment, we see the pendulum swing in the opposite direction, where we are receiving prejudice or notions of shame from our own community and our own families for not speaking Spanish or not speaking Spanish in a certain way or well enough. And so although it is understandable that our parents and our elders would want to to protect us. It is unfortunate that now our own communities are judging us for the ways that we speak. But a lot of it has to do with a lack of awareness that it is not often a choice that many people want to make. Many people don't want to leave their language behind. And feelings of shame come up from those that do, because they might feel like, oh, okay, I made this choice so that I could support my children and my family, and now I feel disconnected from my language and my culture. So it is not without a lot of questioning, a lot of shame on behalf of the elders, on behalf of the children. And so the best thing that we can do is have more of an understanding in terms of why people make these choices, so that we can have empathy for them, so that we can then have conversations to bridge that gap in terms of understanding, and then hopefully make decisions together in order to advance our language and our culture. Something that I saw that was really beautiful, the way that Ricky Martin was invited to participate in the Bad Bunny Super Bowl special. Bad Bunny is somebody who had the privilege to say that he was going to stand in his language, that he wasn't going to abandon Spanish because that was important to him, his culture, his community, that he was going to present himself in a certain way. And he was able to present himself in one of the biggest platforms in the Super Bowl. And I believe that he honored that fact, that people came before him to create that space for him. He was popular within the Spanish-speaking market, doing a crossover album, and then also creating music in both Spanish and English. And so Ricky Martin did a beautiful job of still pushing boundaries. Bad Bunny pushed boundaries in his time, and Bad Bunny didn't shame Ricky Martin or the elders for choosing to speak English in the ways and the times that they did. And instead, he said, thank you for doing what you did. Come with me. Thank you to my elders. Thank you to the traditions. And I appreciate you. And I'm still going to hold on to our culture. Now you sing in Spanish. And I think that that's what we can do with some of our elders who have received this discrimination, this prejudice, this language trauma. For us who have experienced language shame, to not perpetuate this with creating more shame and silence, and instead practice bringing together. Let's talk about it. Let's now practice together. Let's create more space for me and for you so that we can use our language and our culture together. So a big challenge is language trauma. Another challenge is limited awareness, especially by experts. And this is something that hits really close to home because, like for others, in our home, my younger sister had a speech delay, and so she received feedback, she and my parents and I received feedback that we speak less Spanish within the home. And so we did, and again, we were following expert advice at the time. And what happens is that we limited our language, and then later on we're trying to come back to our language, trying to reclaim our language. But the reality is that not only was that limited awareness, but we still have the problem of limited awareness in terms of experts who are practicing their expertise but through a monolingual lens. And so we have educators, we have speech language pathologists, we have doctors who are giving us recommendations in terms of what we should or should not be doing, should or should not be seeing, based on the norms. But those norms are based on monolingual assessments. If they were based on, then oftentimes we would recognize that, of course, it makes sense. There is a silent period for when you are learning any language, first language. There's also a silent period when you're learning additional languages so that you can receive that language in order to produce that language. But because we have certain experts who are being trained through that monolingual lens, they are worried about things because they are not aware of the opportunities and the specific way that language works when you are bridging from one to the other. So something we need to keep in mind is that only about 13% of US public school teachers speak a non-English language at home. So this is very, very important because, again, if they are not getting the training, and we're thinking there are pockets of multilingual communities that hopefully those teachers can then advocate for the services that they need. Those families can advocate for the services that they need. But there are also plenty of families that are in more remote pockets throughout the United States, which makes it even more challenging for these limited teachers who have this multilingual ability or multilingual prep ability. And then on top of that, the families need to advocate extra hard because it's not for a big group, and public school systems are already struggling to service students just in general. Public schools are under attack. And so it's really important that as our teachers and professionals give us recommendations that we start to say, but do we understand that through a bilingual or multilingual? Are the expectations the right expectations for a bilingual or a multilingual family? Less than 1 in 10 speech clinicians can provide services in languages other than English, and only about 9 to 10% of US physicians reported using a non-English language always or often with patients. These are limited resources in terms of the expertise, and if we are not aware that this is a limitation in terms of that field, we cannot advocate for making sure that the services are appropriate for our bilingual and our multilingual family. So we have language trauma, we have limited awareness, and as I promised, number 3, limited resources. This is not talked about enough, in my opinion, and it is quite prevalent for it not to be talked about enough. Limited resources refers to limited time, limited actual tangible resources that we use in order to teach heritage languages, and limited community. So, in terms of limited time, every family is limited in terms of time because you're trying to figure out how to navigate work and school and the responsibilities in your home and homework and connection, actual connection within your family, and many, many other things. And if you consider the fact that on top of all of those regular responsibilities that every family is challenged by in terms of time, how do you navigate bilingualism or multilingualism and maintaining a home language in a dominant English space? That's an even bigger stressor on everything that we are talking about, because now we're thinking about how do you balance off the responsibility of making sure that the homework gets done, but also, do we practice our Spanish? How do I hear about your day? But do we practice our Spanish? When do we practice our Spanish? You're getting frustrated with me. Is it a personality thing? Is it a language thing? I'm worried about you. There's so much that goes into all of the considerations that any family that is a monolingual family would have. Then you add on to that a bilingual family, and the fact that all of these emotions come up because of everything that we mentioned before, it makes time an even more limited resource. And you'll see that time continues to kind of pop up as this limited resource. In terms of tangible resources that we are using to actually practice our language. For example, books in Spanish, shows in Spanish, music in Spanish, anything that we are using to actually, the people who are around us speaking Spanish, so that you can just subconsciously pick up on Spanish. All of that is a part of what is limited if you are not in a dominant Spanish speaking space. And it is more abundant now that we can kind of get books more quickly, order books online. We have streaming services than it was during my time where the internet was not a thing. And so I actually had to go to Puerto Rico, get the CDs, come back, and then if you wanted to get something else, you would go to a Barnes & Noble or a Books A Million, and you would go to the international section and forget about hoping that they had something in Spanish, and then hoping they had something in Puerto Rican Spanish. Things were challenging. If you are a millennial, I feel you. It was not easy, so I am very empathetic for our parents who were trying to figure out how do we get these resources. But even now, having more access to all of those things does not mean that you have the financial resources to order something online or to order a streaming services and then have the time to go to the library and get a book, or have the time to look up what are the best shows are the most appropriate for which age group, and so on and so forth. We love atención in our household. That's a recommendation if you have little ones. But the reality of limited resources and the access to resources, like tangible resources that we use, is a reality. And the time to then find those resources is another reality that many parents have had to and continue to deal with. And then the last one is community. It is an understated and very necessary resource in terms of not only practicing your language, but practicing it in a way that feels like you're making these multicultural connections where you're saying, oh, you do that? It's not just in my household that we practice language and culture in a certain way, but this is what it looks like to be Puerto Rican, at least in Maryland. And oh no, wait, this looks like in the diaspora. Oh no, this is what it looks like to be Puerto Rican everywhere. Making those sorts of connections is a privilege. And I've been on both sides of the spectrum where we were a military family and so we were moving around. I've been in places where there was only one other Latina and she wasn't Puerto Rican, but that was my community, and my parents figured out friends and people to connect with that weren't necessarily Puerto Rican, but we did what we could with what we had, and we met some really beautiful people. And we've had places where my parents were able to say, oh, tú eres boricua, yo soy boricua, okay, pues vamos a tocar plena, or have a fiesta navideña, or do this and that. And thankfully, my parents were in both spaces that they tried to and that they actually were able to achieve it. Here in Maryland, I have experienced the same, where I said, I want to be around more Puerto Ricans. So we started to search and we found Raíces de Borinquen doing bomba classes, and Cultura Plenera has been doing a lot of work, a nonprofit in the DMV area. And we have been able to bring together a lot of the Boricua community in the DMV. Semilla Cultural does it over in Virginia, but it was from this hunger to have culture and community in the diaspora and saying, okay, let's find other people. So I still, after over 10 years of doing this cultural work in the DMV area, see people who are asking, ¿Hay boricua en el DMV? And we reach out. And so I would say, if you are somewhere where you do not feel like there is your community, reach out and ask. Because thankfully, technology is on our side these days. And so if you don't know about it, but it exists, then some people can start to give you recommendations so that you can start to attend. And if you're in a place that there physically isn't just a presence of the community that you are seeking, then thankfully there is the internet, and there are very many online forums that now you can participate in. LUPA Talks being one of them. We have Spanglish sessions where you can actually practice speaking with a community of heritage Spanish speakers, many of us Boricuas, who are going to be supportive of that journey. We also have a WhatsApp group where we're practicing virtually online. I also know of Spanish Sin Pena, and they have an online platform as well as pop-ups all over the United States that you can connect with other speakers of Spanish. And I'm sure that there are other resources that you can connect with. And so the ones that I mentioned, I will make sure to link in the captions so that you guys can connect with them. And also, if you have other recommendations of people who are doing this, put them in the comments so that we can continue to amplify the work that is being done. So we do have certain challenges that we are dealing with. We have language trauma, we have limited awareness, we have limited resources. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there are things that we can do, and there are people doing work that we can celebrate. I want to start there. For all of the challenges that we're seeing in terms of the educational field and the academic field and speech language pathology, there is so much great work that's being done. I'm going to link some of the people in the captions that are my recommendations, people that I see that are doing the work, so that we can celebrate those those people, so that we can amplify those people, so that we can use those people as a resource. Because even though there are limitations and there is work that needs to be done, we also do have people who are doing the work, and so we need to support them, get that voice out there so that we can use them as a resource and make sure that when we go into spaces that we are reminding folks that we have a right to our language. And I also said that I would give you 3 actionable steps of what we can do. Despite all of these challenges, there are things that we can do. And so number 1 is to create empathy. And we create that empathy by having conversations about all of this with the people that we love in order to understand more about why is it that you made the choices that you made. And it can be uncomfortable because you are bringing up some of the stuff that is related to feelings of shame and language shame. And I know that I personally have had these conversations with my family and with my parents, and my mom specifically has mentioned that she feels bad about the fact that we didn't use more of our Spanish language within the household. But that's what the expert said. And so she did the best that she could. And I am grateful for an opportunity to say thank you to her. My sister and I have both shared our gratitude for her doing the best that she could in that time. And now that we know better, we do better. And so our family is practicing with each other, making space for each other, using the language as much as we can, and being very intentional about the way that we use language with future generations. My sister has a daughter, my goddaughter, and we are being very intentional, and I can say it is not easy. So my heart goes out to all the parents and the family members who are trying to preserve the language and make space to make sure that we maintain it for future generations, because it is a lot of work to make sure that what we're listening, make sure that we stay in Spanish, and we value Spanglish, but the reality is that we want to make sure to be very intentional about giving her all of the input that we can give her, so that then she has all of the language, Spanish and English and Spanglish, and then she can feel as proud as possible of her full linguistic repertoire. But it ain't easy. Así que, for that reason, I say we want to create empathy for the experience of our elders and for ourselves who wish we were somewhere else in our language journey. But here we are, and saying I honor my language ability right where it is, and I continue to grow my language ability so that I can continue making connections with my family, my culture, and my community. So we create empathy, number 1. Number 2, find a community. Like I said, you can do that by reaching out, starting to do a little search, or reaching out on the socials, trying to ask for recommendations. And if you don't find that a physical community is an option for you, a virtual community is an option for you, because there are many people who are doing the work. As I mentioned before, LUPA Talks welcomes you with open arms. Spanish Sin Pena is a community, a beautiful community that is supportive of heritage language learners. And there are many other people who are doing the work so that you can feel comfortable and confident in coming back to your language. But community is really important, because not only are you practicing the language, but you're also recognizing that your experiences are the experiences of many. A lot of us are going through that. So it's nothing that we should be shameful of. It's actually something that makes us exactly who we are. It's something that allows us to connect with certain people, certain communities, and it's something that we can celebrate because it makes us richer. It makes us more sabroso. So number 1, create empathy through those conversations. Number 2, find a community. And number 3, start today. And that feels like the most simple and also the most challenging, because it can be overwhelming. But guess what? You already did it. You already started. You're already, if you've gotten to this part in the video, then you've already started doing the work in order to understand that there are challenges beyond your control. And there are ways that we can work around those challenges in order to create opportunities for ourselves. So that acknowledgement is already part of starting today. Journaling about what comes up through all of this awareness is part of starting today. Having conversation with our elders about the decisions that they make, that's part of starting today. And in that, hopefully you find yourself on the journey to not only reflect on the fact that our language ability, wherever we are today, is nothing that we should be shameful for. It's something that we do know something. So how do we build on that something that we do know? And it's something that we can be proud of. The LUPA Talks, standing for language understanding, is really important for me, because the more that we understand that we should be proud of all of that, and that there are challenges that are very real, and at the same time we have choice, gets us to the pride in action. So even before some of us can speak in Spanish, we need to understand why it is that we haven't been able to speak in Spanish. And so hopefully understanding those challenges gets you on that road so that you can start practicing your Spanish in those communities and safe spaces that you feel safe, so that eventually you can branch out into your full culture, homeland community. So part of this is supporting that. I also have an additional resource that I've created. They're Dímelo speaking cards. They are bilingual cards that are focused on getting past that awkward, let's talk about our language and our culture with your family, and instead doing it in what I hope is a fun way. And so these cards are bilingual speaking cards. Half of them are focused on just getting to know you, ponte personal questions that are silly and sometimes a little bit more deep, that you might not have an opportunity to practice with your Spanish in both Spanish and English, because you can come together with your family and someone can practice English and someone else can practice Spanish, and you can do it fully in Spanglish. You have all of the permission in the world to do that, always working towards a little bit more Spanish. And then the other set of cards that are included in here are Dilo como tú quieras, that are focused on that metalinguistic practice. How are we thinking about how we use our language? So what are refranes que tenemos en nuestra familia? What are certain sayings that you have to be a part of your family in order to understand certain words or phrases? What are moments that we were proud of our language? Or what are moments that maybe brought up some shame? And balancing all of that out in these cards and in a space, hopefully with friends and family, that feel safe, and then have some fun by telling stories, I hope help to engage in some of that empathy creation in a fun way, because all of this is more enjoyable and more approachable if we do it from a place of fun, a place of joy, and a place of empathy. I also want to give you a LUPA Talks Reco de la Semana. Así que I am recommending this book by Frases. It's Mujeres, Puertorriqueñas, Históricas que no me enseñaron en la escuela. I love it not only because it is highlighting women en la historia puertorriqueña, but also because as somebody who's always practicing my Spanish, I really love that it's not something that you need to read cover to cover. You can just choose a person and get an insight into what made them important for Puerto Rican history. You're learning about history, you're learning about language, you're learning about culture. You can choose based on certain topics. So ella tiene revolucionaria, activista, pionera. So you can choose based on different people or different categories. And so I think that has been really enjoyable and really approachable. I will put the link in the caption so that you guys can get your own copy. And if you felt like any of this was relatable, any of this kind of resonated with you, share your story with us. Like I said, we heal and we create community by telling our stories and seeing ourselves in one another. And so I love if you would share, if any of this resonated with you, share this with somebody else that you feel like this would resonate with. Like, comment, subscribe, all of the things. And like I said, we do this on a weekly basis. If there's anything that you're interested about learning more about, please share it with me. Y hasta la próxima. Ciao.